As of today, Kung Fu Panda 4 is the most recent installment in the Kung Fu Panda franchise, and I've been looking for an excuse to talk about the movies and its music. Kung Fu Panda 2 is my favorite movie of all time. I've watched all of the Nickelodeon show from 2011, played the failed MMO, and even watched the most recent show where Po goes to England with a bear. I'm going to see Kung Fu Panda 4 in a few hours, and really the thing I'm looking forward to the most is seeing all of the past villains return. I'm sure they have some interesting things to say to Po.
2 hours later.
My opinions of Kung Fu Panda 4 aside, at least for the time being, let's start talking about the score. Throughout the 4 films, the named composers include Hans Zimmer, who worked on all of them, John Powell, who worked on 1 and 2, and Steve Mazzaro, who just worked on 4. There's also these additional music composers. And let me tell you, these guys all cooked. It's not every day where the likes of Hans Zimmer, John Powell, Henry Jackman, and Lorne Balfe all collaborate on some goofy animated film. I'm not joking when I say this franchise houses my favorite film scores of all time, and for good reason. So let's take a look at some of those reasons. Kung Fu Panda is interesting in that it's a fusion of Western animated storytelling tropes, wuxia imagery and themes, and homages to old-school kung fu movies. There's actually a really good video that talks about all of this, which I've linked in the description. But apart from the storytelling themes, the score also reflects this. Hans Zimmer and John Powell are film scoring veterans who have made quintessential Hollywood blockbuster scores. The construction of the orchestration, harmony, and usage of leitmotif, the latter of which we'll talk about in great detail in a second, is all very idiomatic to that Hollywood sound. But of course, I can't even begin to demonstrate any of these examples without also talking about how these Western conventions are combined with the sensibilities of traditional Chinese music, and the associated instrumentation and modalities. I'm not a Chinese musicologist, so ultimately I can't exactly say how accurate the representation of Chinese music is in the score. But from what I understand, Hans Zimmer did his research and worked very closely with the China National Symphony Orchestra when writing the score for the first film. I don't think anybody would disagree that the composers definitely treat the Chinese sound with sincerity and respect. As a side note, I think many of the Chinese or generally Asian-themed scores I haven't liked in the last few years felt kind of like the Chinese or otherwise Asian elements were tacked on, whereas Kung Fu Panda is a wonderful example of how to make that sound an inseparable part of the score's identity, while still being able to fuse it with other styles. This same reason is also why I liked the scores of Turning Red and some parts of the new Avatar live action, neither of which are particularly relevant to this video, but you should listen to those scores as well. But anyways, apart from the Hollywood film score and Chinese music, there's also one final element, the classic kung fu movie sound, which incorporates funk and hip-hop stylings of the 70s through 90s. This can be heard most obviously in the very first cue of the movie, where Po dreams of being a kung fu master. Underneath the action, we hear a unison string melody, brass counter melody, and a driving drum set groove. These horn lines remind me of the themes of classic martial arts films like Police Story, or The Big Boss. Of the influences are of course not explicitly Chinese, but the film and the score aren't trying to be. It's kind of just one big fusion of a bunch of cool things. After all, Po himself is a product of this fusion. In many ways, he's the quintessential wuxia protagonist, a gentle peasant in imperial China with a strong sense of justice who is called to a higher purpose to defeat an evil martial arts master with vaguely supernatural abilities. But he's also rather modern. Nothing about Po is overtly anachronistic, but his demeanor and the way he regards the Furious Five as these almost comic book superheroes is so contemporary and makes him so relatable to Western audiences. Po's associated musical themes reflect this dichotomy. His character theme is bumbling and gentle, and also Chinese in its construction, obviously idiomatic to the era and location. But the bombastic, more modern Western-influenced hero theme also works so well. His aspirations of greatness and unrealistic cartoony violence serve as a wonderful foil to his otherwise clumsy and gentle nature. And the horn-heavy hero theme also serves as a similar foil to perhaps the other main theme of the franchise, Oogway's theme. The intimate but sweeping lines of that theme often underscore the more mystical and peaceful elements of Kung Fu as a philosophy, versus the hero theme underscoring the physicality of the over-the-top fight scenes. We'll take a more detailed look at all of these themes in a second. You may already know that I love leitmotif, and I recognize my bias. More motifs doesn't necessarily mean better score, but it's insanely impressive both how many motifs there are and how compositionally simple they all are while still being so distinct and recognizable. Here's a bunch of random themes from across the franchise, all of which appear in multiple places, even across multiple movies, as motifs. And that's not even all of them, but these themes are both simple and recognizable because they largely stick to one palette, the scales used in traditional Chinese music. Traditional Chinese music mostly uses a version of what we call the Pentatonic Scale in the West, so named because there are 5 tones. In Chinese, these 5 tones are gong, shang, jue, zhi, and yu, or in Western solfege, do, re, mi, sol, and la. These are the 12-tet approximations, as traditionally these tones are derived from the harmonic series, which I talked about in my last video. But anyways, the cool thing about the pentatonic scale is how consonant any permutation of notes is. After all, the scale is just a series of 5 stacked fifths. The smallest possible interval in the pentatonic scale is the major second, which is fairly consonant, especially compared to the smaller minor second that is otherwise present in the major scale. This allows for any combination of notes, both melodically and harmonically, without any grating dissonances. Also, the scale is able to be centered on any of the notes, which creates a different kind of modality. The standard order kind of just sounds like the major scale, since it essentially is, excluding the minor second creating 4th and 7th scale degrees. But if we start the scale on yu, or the 5th note, then we have an analog of the minor pentatonic scale, which sounds like this. Still the same notes, but now kind of cool and jazzy. All of this pentatonic yapping is important, because the scores of all of the films mostly stick to pentatonic melodies. Let's take another look at both of the aforementioned de facto main themes of the franchise. The melody is entirely in deep pentatonic minor. I especially love how well the Chinese modality overlaps with this action hero funk-inspired groove. The minor pentatonic scale used here is recognizably Chinese, but also evocative of the jazz sensibilities found in funk melodies. But then we also have the other main theme, heard most clearly in Oogway Ascends. It's such a fascinating cue compositionally. It's mostly pentatonic, but breaks the scale at exactly 2 points, both times creating a falling minor second. To me, this feels very deliberate. It takes advantage of the pentatonic scale's consonants and creates these really efficient tension moments when it breaks out. And one other super important aspect of that is the advantage of the fusion in styles. The underlying harmony isn't inherently Chinese. In fact, it's kind of just standard John Powell-y How to Train Your Dragon sweeping film score type stuff. But I think that's a huge reason why this cue just sounds so good. The melody is so strong and evocative, and since it's mostly pentatonic, it's very flexible and fits over any harmony underneath. And the wider array of notes available to the Western chromatic scale allows the harmony to be more diverse to bolster the melody. And these qualities extend to pretty much every single cue. The simplicity of the mostly pentatonic scale melodies over constantly changing harmony creates such a great synergy and allows all of the motifs to cut through. The harmony in these cues often is what defines the mood of the scene, and since these themes are all so simple, not only can they feel appropriate in any mood, they can even weave portions of themselves into and over each other while still retaining their identity. There's so many examples of this. When Po and Tai Lung are fighting for the Dragon Scroll, the music switches between their motifs based on who has the upper hand. Or how about when Po and the Furious Five are escaping a falling tower in the second movie? Because almost everything is pentatonic, there's no need to worry about unintentionally changing the flavor of the music. It just blends so seamlessly. And the motifs can change melodically while still being recognizable. The comedy motif is often in a major pentatonic flavor. But sometimes it's turned more minor, used in a higher stakes but still comedic setting. And lastly, these themes would be nothing if not for the repetition throughout the franchise. It's hard to even choose a cue to demonstrate this because it's hard to find a cue that doesn't. Even smaller motifs, like what I call the Furious Five theme, makes an appearance in the famous bridge fight from the first movie. But among other places, it also appears in the second movie, matching the same orchestration and general arrangement. The cool thing is, though, it's not just because the Furious Five are in both scenes, but also because both feature the other four supporting Tigress specifically. She even uses the exact same move in both scenes. So speaking of the bridge fight, I've skirted around talking about the villain themes because I need to talk about them in their own section. The villain themes are all so hard, and perhaps even the best part of the franchise. Let's take a look at the first villain. Tai Lung has two main motifs. We've previously seen that almost all of the melodies in the Kung Fu Panda franchise avoid half steps, which is due to how the pentatonic scale is constructed. Both of the Tai Lung motifs introduce half steps into the melody. The end of this phrase has a minor scale walkdown, which has a half step between the third and second scale degrees. These four notes in the melody form the minor tetrachord, or first four notes in the minor scale, which is obviously used here to give a sinister vibe to the antagonist. It's still interesting though because it does notably break a previously established convention of the score, which is probably a deliberate compositional choice to unnerve the listener. And this goes even further in the second motif, which dances around that minor tonic using only half steps. It's just so campy and evil, but so efficient in breaking the pentatonic scale and feeling so dark. Probably not the inspiration, but it reminds me of the underwater steroids music from Shaolin Soccer. But we haven't even talked about my favorite part of his theme. Listen to the isolated percussion from this part of his escape music. It combines the live Chinese percussion with sampled, processed drums that feel kind of 90s hip-hoppy. It's really cool because it's another interesting homage to that era of classic kung fu movies. And then just out of nowhere, there's also this Mick Gordon Doom-style synth bass that underscores many of Tai Lung's scenes. It honestly shouldn't work, combining all of these different styles and influences for just one character's theme in a movie that otherwise has such a cohesive palette. But it's just raw as hell, and that's all that matters. Apart from one other cue in Kung Fu Panda 3, which I think may have even been cut from the actual film, this is the only instance of synths or heavy drum sampling I could find in the entire franchise, and that just cements Tai Lung as the GOAT. But the other villain themes are also really cool in their own right. Lord Shen from the second movie also has 2 motifs, or maybe even 4 depending on how you think about it. It's definitely different from Tai Lung's themes, whereas his were more forward and menacing with immediate, dissonant motifs. Both of Shen's themes start off with a looping, rhythmic ostinato that eventually places a slower melody over top. I think it really captures Shen as a character. The fast rhythmic motif with the colder, sustained melody shows that Shen is more reserved and calculating than Tai Lung, but still an agile and formidable fighter in his own right. I especially love that 7/8 theme of his. The odd time signature highlights his trickiness compared to the previous villain. He throws flurries of hidden knives and slips around Po, always keeping him on his toes every time they fight. The 7/8 is just so striking. The same 1-2, 1-2, 1-2-3 pattern is always used for his theme, and it's so iconic that you can strip away both the underlying ostinato and main melody while still having it feel like Shen's theme, which allows for some really cool juxtaposition of other motifs onto the 7/8 groove. Listen to this part of Zen Ball Master from Kung Fu Panda 2 for instance. So dang cool. And Shen's instrumental palette is also different compared to Tai Lung. Whereas the former utilized driving synth bass and Chinese percussion in his themes, Shen utilizes a lot of stringy instruments, like the Gucheng ostinato and erhu melody, doubled with violins. It definitely has that higher class Chinese royalty vibe befitting of Lord Shen. And then we have pretty much the complete opposite kind of sound for the third villain of the franchise, General Kai. The self-proclaimed beast of vengeance and maker of widows is a lumbering, ancient ox warrior who fights with blades on a chain that he swings around himself. And his theme is an Imagine Dragons song. No, not figuratively, it's literally a song composed by John Imagine Dragon.
Oh, the misery!
Specifically the song I'm So Sorry. So I've seen people say throughout the years that Kai's theme is in fact a reference to I'm So Sorry, and I always thought it was just coincidence. After all, the theme is literally just a looping 4-note sequence. But no, after checking the credits, Kai's theme is literally I'm So Sorry. I have thoughts about this, but I'll talk about it more in a second. Regardless of the origin though, I just love how well it works for Kai and contrasts from the previous 2 themes. The simple, heavy, halftime feel of his theme matches his giant and imposing frame perfectly. The music literally sounds like giant steps. 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 The music literally sounds like gi hell did I write this? But Kai is also kind of just this no-nonsense dude. His theme is just 4 notes that loop, and that's really all there is to it. It doesn't have the more sophisticated melody seen with the previous villains. The melody is played on Chinese plucked string instruments like the guzheng and pipa with low brass stabs underneath. This combined with the occasional jaw harp makes the theme so twangy but still menacing, fitting of this ancient but still kind of rural warlord. And of course the most iconic part of the film, when he first arrives before the heroes, the halftime feel of his score is at the same tempo as the swinging of his blades, at least for the first few swings. It's just such a neat choice, taking the tempo of a consistent rhythmic element on screen to sync the score to. In film scoring, this technique is called Mickey Mousing, and while it's not uncommon, it could definitely have been a little cheesy if it adhered too closely, so just having it sync on those 2 swings is just so badass. But anyways, as the pattern goes, it would now be time to talk about Kung Fu Panda 4's villain, the Chameleon, but we'll come back to that in a second so I can talk about Kung Fu Panda 4 as a whole and also give a brief warning for mild spoilers. So the elephant in the room. I thought Kung Fu Panda 4 and its score were disappointing. I don't like to talk negatively about any particular piece of media as a whole, especially because I suspect much of my disappointment was due to crunch and studio meddling. By this point, there's dozens of video essays already on YouTube about why you should hate it, but I don't really want to sour my video about why I like the franchise with some big negative soapbox, so I'll kind of just speedrun my complaints relative to the previous scores. In general, I felt the final fight scene was kind of lacking in terms of score. It didn't have that Kung Fu Panda feeling and was kind of generic. I felt as if many of the prior motifs were gone, or at the very least, much less common, but the movie only introduced 3 new motifs that I could hear, that being a new general action theme, Zhen's theme, and the Chameleon's theme. I found the Chameleon's theme pretty disappointing considering how strong the prior villain themes were. It doesn't really do anything that wasn't already done better by a prior theme. It has the minor second chromaticism of Tai Lung's theme, but not enough, so it kinda just feels like a generic minor key evil theme. It has a melody played on erhu like Shen, but lacks the sauce he had with his multiple iconic ostinatos underneath. It's simple like Kai's theme, but more subdued, so I didn't even notice her theme on the first watch. If this was all intentional, it actually works very well with her narrative themes in the movie. It tries hard to be like all the other prior villains, but spreads itself too thin and feels living up to any of them. In other words, if I wanted to watch a movie about a chameleon with Hans Zimmer music, I just watch Rango again. Okay, but jokes aside, the score overall was actually pretty decent, and has grown on me. I especially really like how well Zhen's theme meshes with the other motifs, and the tavern fight has so many wonderful callbacks to prior motifs, but still feels pretty fresh in its own right. And speaking of the tavern, we stand the gay dads. They also respected Tai Lung's synth bass and brought it back during one of his fight scenes, which was super hype. But honestly, my favorite parts of the score were the 2 licensed tunes. During a chase sequence, we hear a Chinese instrumentation cover of Crazy Train, which was completely unexpected to say the least. To be honest, I was kind of lukewarm about it while watching, because it definitely breaks the more traditional Chinese melodic precedent set in the prior films. And we could have instead had a really fun cue similar to the rickshaw chase from Kung Fu Panda 2. The franchise definitely started embracing the idea of Chinesifying popular Western music starting in Kung Fu Panda 3, with Kai's theme being from Imagine Dragons and the Panda Village / Chi motif literally being everybody was Kung Fu fighting. I think those 2 are a bit weird and immersion breaking as well, especially the latter since it's kind of maybe a tad problematic if you think about it. But at least both of those motifs still cleverly adhere to the pentatonic scale, whereas Crazy Train doesn't. But even after all of these criticisms, the cue just goes so unbelievably hard that I can't help but love it. Also, as a side note, there is absolutely some boomer executive at DreamWorks who keeps forcing Crazy Train into the movies. As in recent years, it's been in Megamind, Trolls World Tour, and now Kung Fu Panda 4. But anyways, at the end of the movie, there's also Tenacious D's cover of Baby One More Time that is similarly unexpected in its inclusion, but similarly so fire. Overall, I'm cautiously optimistic about the future of the franchise and its score. I think there's just so much awesome material to work with, yet also just so much more room for cool innovation. But I suppose I'll just have to wait and see. But before we end the video, a word from our sponsor. This video was sponsored by Fesley. Fesley makes a variety of different instruments, including keyboards, trumpets, violins, electronic drum sets, and electric guitars. Today I'll be reviewing their Fesley DIY electric guitar specifically, which they have kindly sent me. Fesley's DIY guitars have a premium poplar body, providing excellent tonal characteristics and durability. The guitar can be customized, stained, or painted to match your personal style. Also, the DIY guitars include pre-drilled holes to simplify the assembly process. Here's a time-lapse of myself building the guitar. The body, neck, strings, screws, and tools are all packed separately for easy organization while you're building. A few tools are included, but keep in mind you will need a few different screwdriver heads, pliers, and a ring spanner for optimal construction. But overall, it's a pretty straightforward process. I don't do much DIY, but the included instruction manual makes the construction process decently intuitive. It is also recommended that you have a bit of guitar knowledge beforehand, as there are references to parts and general construction of the guitar that are a bit contingent on prior knowledge. The entire construction process, including stringing and adjusting the action, took about 2 hours, and that was with me having essentially no guitar experience beforehand. So I would definitely recommend the Fesley DIY if you're looking for an additional affordable guitar, and especially if you like DIY projects. Well fellas, here's the guitar. I just built it. Yeah, here it is. This is actually my first guitar ever. So also disclaimer, I'm not really much of a guitarist, but I'll try my best to kind of demonstrate some tone and yeah, we'll play some cool stuff. So here's the clean tone by itself. Link for the Fesley DIY guitar and discount code are in the description.